Wait, stop. Lucy's voice rang out across the diner, sharp and sudden. You're about to lose everything. You know that, right? Before we dive in, let me ask you something. Have you ever been so close to making a mistake that could change everything? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you've ever had someone unexpected save you, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you don't want to miss how this story ends. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The morning rush at Ruby's Diner had just begun. The usual crowd was trickling in. Truckers stopping for a coffee refill, local workers grabbing a quick bite before heading to the job sites, and the occasional college student stumbling in with a half-sleepy smile. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air, the kind of comfort that only small-town diners seem to get right. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's name and everyone had a story. But for Jack, none of that mattered. Sitting at a corner booth by the window, he was hunched over a stack of papers that seemed to spill over the edges of the table. The bold letters of final agreement stared back at him, a reminder of everything he had worked for, everything he had built, and now, everything that could fall apart with a single mistake. His phone buzzed again. He glanced at it. Another message from his lawyer. You need to sign. Today. The weight of the moment pressed down on him harder with each passing second. A sweat formed on his brow. His company was on the brink of bankruptcy, and this deal, this signature, was supposed to be the lifeline. But Jack knew deep down he was rushing. He wasn't fully reading the papers. His mind was clouded with the pressure, the fear of losing it all. In that moment, he couldn't afford to think. He just needed to act. Quickly. A few tables away, Lucy wiped down the counter. She'd worked at Ruby's for 3 years, and in that time, she'd learned how to handle anything that came her way. Rude customers, spilled drinks, burnt toast. But today was different. She had a feeling about the man in the corner booth. She'd seen him before, on the rare occasions when he came in, always looking like he had something important to do. Always looking like the world was on his shoulders. She noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way he rubbed his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. He wasn't just having breakfast. He was trying to save his life. Lucy's eyes flickered down to the papers on the table, and something caught her attention. A tiny detail in the fine print. A line that didn't quite make sense. The kind of thing most people would miss, especially in the middle of a rush. She could tell by the way he was scanning the document that he hadn't noticed. A sudden flash of intuition hit her. She didn't know who he was, but she could tell he was on the edge. And this one little detail could ruin him. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, and the sound of sizzling bacon became background noise as Lucy's instincts kicked in. She wasn't going to let him sign away everything without a second look. Lucy took a deep breath, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked over to his booth. She could feel the weight of the moment, the hesitation in her step. She wasn't sure why she was doing this, but she knew she had to. "Excuse me," she said, her voice just loud enough to break through the quiet hum of the diner. "I don't mean to interrupt, but I think you're about to make a huge mistake." Jack didn't look up right away. He was too absorbed in the papers, his mind racing. He waved his hand dismissively. "I'm fine. Just need to." "No, you're not," Lucy interrupted gently, her eyes locked on the papers. "You missed something." His head snapped up. There was frustration in his eyes, but there was something else too, something like vulnerability. He was caught between dismissing her and realizing she might be right. "What are you talking about?" Jack asked, a little sharper than he intended. He looked at her now, really looked at her for the first time, and for a brief moment he was aware of how out of control he felt. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Lucy continued, her voice calm, "but there's a mistake in the contract. You've got a clause here that could cost you your business." Jack blinked, his mind struggling to catch up. He had been so consumed with his stress that he hadn't even thought to double-check the fine print. "What? Are you sure?" Lucy nodded. She reached over and pointed at a small line in the contract, just barely noticeable. "Right here. This could ruin you if you sign it. I'm not saying I'm an expert, but I've seen enough of these kinds of deals to know when something's off." Jack's stomach dropped. He looked at the clause she pointed out. His heart raced as the realization hit him. The deal was about to fall apart because of a simple mistake. One he never would have noticed without Lucy. He felt a wave of embarrassment wash over him. The truth was, he hadn't been paying attention. He had been so wrapped up in trying to hold everything together that he had nearly lost everything. He let out a long breath, trying to compose himself. "How did you even notice that?" Lucy shrugged, not missing a beat. "It's just what I do. I pay attention." There was a long pause. Jack looked down at the papers, then back at Lucy, unsure of what to say next. His world felt like it had just shifted beneath his feet. "Thank you," he finally said, his voice softer now, a mix of gratitude and disbelief. You just saved me." Jack sat there for a long moment, staring at the papers. His mind raced, his heart pounding as he tried to process what just happened. Lucy had pointed out the mistake in the contract, and now, for the first time in hours, he could breathe. He looked up at her, still in disbelief. "I can't believe I almost signed this." Lucy stood at the edge of the table, hands on her hips, watching him carefully. "You're not the first person to almost make a mistake like that," she said softly, though her words carried an underlying strength. "But you're lucky I noticed it in time." Jack's mind was still reeling, but her words brought him back to reality. He realized he owed her more than a quick thank you. He needed to figure out what came next, and, if he was being honest, he was starting to wonder just how much he could trust her insight. He glanced down at the contract again, shaking his head. "I've been so focused on this deal," he muttered, more to himself than to her. I couldn't see it." Lucy didn't offer a response right away. She simply waited. It was a simple thing, waiting, but it felt like the only thing that made sense in this moment. "You're under a lot of pressure," she finally said, her voice low. "Anyone would miss something like this." Jack nodded slowly, his mind still racing. He didn't know what to do next. What was the right move after someone saved you from disaster? What was the proper way to thank someone for pulling you back from the edge? "Let me buy you a coffee at least," he said, his voice uncertain but genuine. "You've earned it." Lucy raised an eyebrow but didn't back down. "I don't need your money, mister," she trailed off, realizing she didn't even know his name. "I'm Lucy." "Jack," he said quickly, "and I insist. It's the least I can do." Lucy hesitated. She didn't expect this kind of gesture from someone like him. Most people didn't even see her in the diner. She was just part of the background. But Jack wasn't like most people. He wasn't brushing off her help. For once, someone had noticed her, and she felt seen. "All right, Jack," she said with a small half-smile. "But just one cup. That's it." Jack gave a half-hearted laugh and picked up his pen. He crossed out the part of the contract that Lucy had pointed out and made a note to call his lawyer. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time today he felt a sense of control again. He followed her to the counter, still processing everything. The sounds of clinking dishes and soft chatter filled the air as Lucy set a fresh cup of coffee in front of him. She didn't say much as she wiped down the counter, keeping her distance. But the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was steady, grounded. Jack took a long sip of the coffee, feeling the warmth spread through him. It wasn't just the caffeine, it was a moment of relief. He felt like he was finally waking up from a nightmare he couldn't control. "So," Lucy spoke up, breaking the quiet. "What's next for you?" Jack sighed, setting the coffee cup down. "I don't know," he admitted. "I thought signing that deal was my last chance. Now, I need to figure out if I can fix this, if I can save everything." Lucy nodded but didn't press further. She had seen this before, the way people clung to their problems, thinking they were the only ones who could solve them. She didn't know the specifics of his life, but she could tell Jack was someone who didn't ask for help easily. And now, here he was, sitting in her diner, asking for help in the only way he knew how. "I'm sure you'll figure it out," Lucy said, her voice softer now, more real. "You've got that look in your eyes, the one that says you're not ready to give up yet." Jack smiled, grateful for her simple encouragement. Maybe you're right. There was a brief pause as he stared out the window. The street outside was busy with morning commuters, the world going about its business while Jack's world hung in the balance. Lucy placed a fresh pot of coffee on the counter and stepped back, giving Jack the space to think. He wasn't used to people just letting him sit in his thoughts, but for some reason, with Lucy, it didn't feel so bad. After a while, Jack cleared his throat. I don't know how to thank you for this. I was about to sign my life away. It means a lot. Lucy glanced over at him but didn't answer immediately. It wasn't about the thank you for her, it was about the moment. She didn't need him to repay her, but she did feel a shift inside herself. Maybe she was more than just a waitress. Maybe today she was a lifeline. You don't need to thank me, Jack, she said with a small smile. I just did what anyone would do. Jack stared at her for a moment, something changing in his expression. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was something deeper. He saw her, truly saw her, in a way he hadn't seen anyone in a long time. There was something about Lucy, something he couldn't quite put his finger on, but it made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to figure everything out on his own. As he stood up to leave, he glanced at her one more time, his voice a little more certain. I'll come back for that coffee. I'll make sure to pay you back. In more ways than one. Lucy's smile softened. No need for that, she said, shaking her head. Just don't mess up again. Jack chuckled. I'll try not to. As he walked out of the diner, the weight of the world seemed a little lighter. But he knew it wasn't over. This was just the beginning. And somehow, in that quiet moment, he realized that this small interaction, this brief collision of two very different worlds, might just change everything. Jack's mind wouldn't stop racing as he walked back to his car, each step weighed down by the uncertainty of what was to come. He'd almost signed away everything. A decision that could have cost him his company, his savings, his future, and Lucy had saved him. But still, the question lingered. Could he really trust the deal now? Could he even trust himself to make the right decisions anymore? Back in his car, Jack leaned against the wheel for a moment, the hum of the engine buzzing through his body. His phone buzzed again. Another message from his lawyer, reminding him to finalize the contract. He let out a heavy breath, but instead of calling, he just stared at the screen, thinking about Lucy. He had barely known her an hour, yet she had already become a part of this mess he'd gotten himself into. A waitress in a small diner, someone he could have easily overlooked. Yet she'd seen the mistake he almost made. She was the only person who had really seen him today. The rest of the world, they all just saw the successful businessman. But Lucy, she saw through that mask. And that scared him. He wasn't used to letting people in. Hell, he barely let his closest friends in. His life had always been about control, about managing everything, from his business to his emotions. The idea of someone else having a hold over his decisions, whether it was his company or even his next move, felt like a loss of power he couldn't afford. His phone buzzed again, and Jack snapped out of his thoughts. He tossed the phone on the passenger seat and started the engine, shifting into drive. As he pulled out of the diner's parking lot, his eyes briefly caught a glimpse of Lucy, standing at the counter, wiping it down again like she'd never stopped working. She wasn't a part of his world. He wasn't supposed to care what she thought. She was just a waitress. But there was something about her, something that kept tugging at him, making him question all his instincts. The next morning, Jack returned to the office as usual. The bright city skyline outside his window looked the same as it always did, but everything felt different. His mind wasn't on the numbers in front of him or the urgent calls waiting for him to make. It was on the woman in the diner. The way she spoke to him so directly, so sure of herself. The way she didn't hesitate to call him out when everyone else would have let him go ahead with his mistake. But what was worse? The fact that he kept thinking about her, or that he didn't want to admit he couldn't stop. Mr. Montgomery? His assistant, Karen, stood in the doorway, a stack of papers in her hand. The lawyers are waiting on you. They need your signature today to move forward. Jack glanced at her, but his mind was somewhere else. Tell them I'll be there in a minute. Karen hesitated, sensing something was off. Are you sure everything's all right? Everything's fine, Jack said quickly, his voice sharper than he intended. I'll be right there. The door closed behind her, and Jack sank back into his chair, running a hand through his hair. He stared at the contract again. There was no mistake this time, no small print to catch. The deal was sound. It would save everything, his company, his reputation, his future. And yet, it didn't feel right. Lucy's words echoed in his mind. You're not the first person to almost make a mistake like that. Maybe it was the weight of it all, or maybe it was the small voice in his head telling him to pause. But Jack didn't pick up the pen. Instead, he set the papers aside and leaned back in his chair. He was tired. Tired of the constant pressure. Tired of fighting every single day to stay afloat, to keep it all together. But most of all, he was tired of feeling like he was losing control over his own decisions. His phone buzzed again. It was a message from his lawyer. Jack, we need your signature now. For a second, Jack just stared at it. What if this deal wasn't the answer? What if it was just another way to bury the real problem, to avoid dealing with the fact that he had no idea what he was doing anymore? Suddenly, his thoughts turned to Lucy. She'd offered him something he hadn't even realized he needed. A moment of clarity. In that diner, she hadn't just saved his business. She'd made him think. She'd made him question everything. Jack stood up abruptly and grabbed his jacket. He wasn't sure what he was doing yet, but he knew one thing. He couldn't go on like this anymore. He couldn't make this decision alone. Not when it felt like the rest of his life was hanging by a thread. He walked out of his office and down the hall, his shoes clicking against the polished floors. He was walking faster now, his pace quickening as the thought formed in his mind. He had to see her. He had to understand why she had made him feel so much when he was so determined to feel nothing. When Jack arrived at Ruby's diner an hour later, the place was almost empty. A few early risers sipped coffee at the counter, but the usual bustle of the lunch rush hadn't hit yet. He paused for a second, standing just outside, before pushing the door open. Lucy was wiping down a table by the window, her eyes focused on the task at hand. She didn't notice him at first, so Jack stood there for a moment, watching her. What was he doing here? This wasn't his world. But still, something pulled him in. When she finally looked up and saw him standing there, her expression flickered briefly in surprise. You again? She asked, a faint smile playing on her lips. Jack stepped forward, his mind finally made up. Yeah, me again. He sat down at the counter, right across from her, feeling a bit out of place. I wanted to thank you, he said slowly, his voice quieter than usual. For yesterday. For what you did. Lucy raised an eyebrow. You're welcome. But you're still gonna be all right? You didn't come here for some other reason, did you? Jack hesitated, his thoughts swirling. I don't know, he said, meeting her gaze. But maybe I need someone like you to remind me of what I'm missing. She blinked, surprised by his honesty. He didn't try to dress it up or hide behind a mask. For the first time in a long while, Jack felt like he was actually being seen. Jack hadn't planned on coming back to the diner. But here he was, again. The bell above the door jingled as he walked in, and Lucy looked up, meeting his gaze with the same calm indifference that had settled over her face the last time they'd spoken. Her stance was the same, arms crossed, leaning against the counter. She didn't seem surprised to see him, though the surprise was still there, hiding behind her careful composure. You're back, she said, her voice flat but not unkind. Yeah, Jack said, his hands in his pockets. He shifted from one foot to the other, not sure how to explain why he'd walked back in. I guess I'm not done with my coffee yet. Lucy watched him for a beat, then nodded toward the counter. Have a seat. Jack slid onto one of the stools, the same spot as before, the one that had somehow felt like the beginning of something he didn't understand. She was wiping down the counter, like she had before, but her movements were slower now, like she was waiting for something. Felt like the calm before a storm. So, Lucy said, breaking the silence, what's going on with you? You look lost. Jack couldn't deny it. He hadn't been able to shake the weight of the contract, the phone calls, the endless pressure. I don't know, he admitted, his voice rougher than he intended. Everything feels like it's spiraling out of control. Lucy paused in her cleaning, her eyes meeting his for the first time since he'd walked in. It wasn't the polite glance she'd given him earlier. It was real. She saw through him. "You're not the first person who's felt like that," she said quietly. "But, sometimes you have to stop running from it." Jack didn't respond right away. He wasn't sure what to say. She was right, of course. He had spent so long trying to outrun failure, trying to keep it all together. But somehow, sitting in this diner, in front of this woman who didn't know his world, it felt different. "Maybe I need to make a change," he said, his voice more thoughtful than before. "Maybe I need to stop pretending that I can control everything." Lucy didn't immediately respond, and for a moment, it felt like they were in their own little world, separate from the noise of the diner around them. She let him talk without interruption, letting the silence fill the space between them. "Lucy," Jack began, his voice uncertain but steady. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I've spent years building this company, keeping it together, fighting to stay on top. But now, I don't know if it's worth it." She took a breath and leaned against the counter, her eyes never leaving his. "I can't tell you if it's worth it, Jack. But I can tell you that sometimes the things we build aren't the things that make us happy." Jack looked at her, as if he was seeing her for the first time. The reality of what she was saying hit him harder than he expected. He had spent so many years focused on his career, his image, on what people expected of him. He had surrounded himself with people who needed something from him, his money, his influence, his power, but none of them ever really asked what he needed. None of them cared about him as a person. Not like Lucy did. "Tell me about your life, Lucy," Jack said suddenly, the question slipping out before he could stop it. "What's it like to not have to worry about all of this?" Lucy let out a short laugh, but it wasn't one of amusement. It was more like she was laughing at herself. "I guess you could say it's simple," she said. "I work here. I live in a little apartment down the street. I don't have a lot, but I don't need a lot. I've learned that much." Jack nodded, taking in her words. Simple. He hadn't known simple in a long time. The weight of the world was always on his shoulders, always pulling him down. "I don't know if I can do that," he said quietly. "I don't know if I can give all this up." Lucy didn't respond immediately. She just kept cleaning the counter, her movements slow and deliberate, almost meditative. Finally, after a long silence, she said, "Maybe it's not about giving it up, Jack. Maybe it's about knowing when to let go." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Letting go. That was what he had to do. Let go of the fear. Let go of the idea that he could control everything. Maybe he didn't need to hold on to all this weight anymore. He felt vulnerable, exposed. And for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like weakness. Felt like freedom. Jack ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." Lucy shrugged. "You don't have to be. But one day you might find that you are." Jack stared at her, his mind spinning. Her words had broken through something inside him, something he'd been hiding from for too long. Maybe it wasn't about getting rid of everything, but about recognizing what truly mattered. And Lucy? She was starting to feel like the thing that mattered most. The bell above the door jingled again, snapping him out of his thoughts. A few customers walked in, and Lucy immediately shifted into her work mode, greeting them with a smile as she moved to take their orders. Jack sat there for a moment longer, watching her, unsure of what to do with the feelings she had stirred in him. But he knew one thing. He didn't want to walk away from this moment. He didn't want to walk away from her. As he stood up to leave, he turned to her one last time. "Thanks for talking with me, Lucy," he said. "I'll be back." She didn't say anything, just gave him a small nod as he left. But there was something different about the way she looked at him now, like she had seen something in him that he had barely seen in himself. The next few days felt like an avalanche for Jack. Everything that had seemed so stable suddenly felt fragile. His phone was buzzing nonstop. Lawyers, investors, his accountant. The pressure was building, each call reminding him of the weight of everything he could lose. But despite the madness, his mind kept circling back to the quiet moments at Ruby's diner, and to Lucy. The woman who had seen through the polished facade he kept up. The woman who had made him rethink everything. Jack had spent years building a life that appeared perfect on the outside, but on the inside, it was crumbling. He had been running from the truth, avoiding the fact that he wasn't happy, that he hadn't been for a long time. But now, Lucy's simple words had started to crack open something in him. He didn't need to lose everything to fix it, but he needed to find a way to stop pretending. But how? He wasn't sure. Every decision he made was still tied to his business, his reputation. He had no idea how to untangle the mess he had created. Jack. His lawyer's voice echoed through the phone, dragging him back into the moment. We need an answer. The deal's on the table. If you don't sign today, we risk losing it. Jack stared at the contract again. The same deal that had nearly ruined him. The same deal that had kept him up at night, questioning everything. He knew what the right thing was, but his fingers hovered over the pen, hesitant. His gut was screaming at him, telling him not to sign. But the weight of his responsibilities, his employees, his family, everything he had worked for, made it hard to walk away. He ended the call without making a decision, the silence of his office filling the space with tension. For the first time in years, he was truly at a crossroads. The pressure was overwhelming, but something deeper inside him told him that this moment was different. Jack pushed his chair back and walked toward the window, looking out at the city below. The skyline had always symbolized success to him, but now it seemed cold and distant. He turned his back to the window, then grabbed his jacket, his mind made up. Later that evening, Jack walked into Ruby's diner once again, his heart beating a little faster this time. He hadn't been able to shake the need to see Lucy. It felt like his last chance to make sense of all the confusion swirling in his head. Maybe she had the answers. Maybe she didn't. But there was something about her that made him feel like he didn't have to pretend. Lucy was standing at the counter when he entered, a tray of coffee cups in her hand. She looked up, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment, he thought he saw something like surprise in them. But she quickly masked it, nodding a greeting. "You're back," she said, setting the cups down on the counter. "I thought you'd be too busy to come around here again." Jack stepped closer, his words hesitant but clear. "I couldn't stop thinking about what you said, about letting go, about doing things differently." Lucy raised an eyebrow but didn't speak, letting him continue. "I've been running in circles for years, Lucy, building this empire, but I don't know if I even know why anymore. Everything feels so off." His voice cracked a little as he spoke, and for the first time in a long while, Jack didn't care about keeping up his image. Lucy leaned against the counter, watching him with a steady gaze. "You're not the only one, you know. Everyone's got their own version of off. But you don't have to carry it alone." Her words hit him harder than he expected. For so long, he had tried to carry everything alone. His responsibilities, his guilt, his dreams. It was easier to keep it all inside, easier to hold the world at arm's length. But maybe it wasn't supposed to be that way. "I don't know what to do anymore," Jack admitted, his voice almost a whisper. "I don't know how to fix this." Lucy looked at him quietly for a long moment before responding. "Sometimes the first step is just admitting you can't fix it. You can't control everything, Jack. And maybe that's okay." Her words resonated in him. It felt like a weight had been lifted from his chest, just by hearing someone else say what he had been too afraid to admit. "I don't know if I can walk away from this deal," Jack said, his voice full of uncertainty. "It could save everything, but I'm not sure it's the right thing anymore." Lucy nodded slowly, as if she understood. "You've got to trust yourself. Trust that you'll make the right choice, even if it feels like you're taking a leap into the unknown." For a moment, Jack felt exposed. This woman, this stranger, had somehow seen the cracks in his armor. And now, she was offering him something he hadn't realized he needed: freedom. The freedom to make a choice without fear of failure, without the burden of having to be perfect. He took a deep breath and finally said, "I think I need to stop chasing what I think I want, and start going after what I actually need." Lucy's smile was soft, but it felt like a victory. "That's a start." Later that night, Jack sat at his desk, staring at the contract one last time. He could feel his heart racing, his palms sweating, but something inside him was different. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't trying to control every detail. He wasn't worried about losing it all. He wasn't afraid of making a mistake. With a deep breath, Jack picked up the pen and signed the document. But this time, it didn't feel like a surrender. Felt like a choice. A choice to move forward with clarity, with the knowledge that he was finally listening to himself. It wasn't the easy path, but it was the right one. The rain had started coming down hard, hammering against the windows of Jack's office. It was the kind of rain that didn't just fall, it poured, as if the sky was trying to wash away everything below it. The kind of rain that made the world feel smaller, quieter. And for Jack, it matched the storm inside him perfectly. He sat at his desk, the papers scattered in front of him. Contracts, proposals, plans. The very same things that had once seemed like the path to success now felt like chains around his wrists. He hadn't been able to stop thinking about Lucy's words, about letting go, about trusting himself. But even now, as he stared at the deal in front of him, he felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him harder than ever. His phone buzzed again. It was a message from his accountant. "Jack, we need a decision. This deal could save us. It's a risk, but if you sign, we're back on track. We can't afford another delay." Jack's heart raced as he read the message. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. One part of him wanted to throw the papers in the trash, walk away from everything, and never look back. Another part of him knew that if he didn't act now, it could all slip through his fingers. He stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor, and walked over to the window. The city skyline was blurred through the rain, the lights twinkling like distant stars. He'd spent so long climbing to the top, thinking it would make him happy. But now, standing here, he felt more alone than ever. Suddenly, the door to his office creaked open. It was his assistant, Mary, her face tight with worry. "Jack, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something you need to know." He turned to her, his pulse quickening. "What is it?" She hesitated, glancing at the stack of papers on his desk. "The investors, they're getting cold feet. They're threatening to pull out if you don't sign the deal today." Jack's mind went blank. He had always known this moment was coming. The pressure, the expectations, everything had led to this. But somehow it didn't feel like a victory. Felt like failure. "I can't do this anymore, Mary," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "What do you mean?" she asked, stepping closer. "I can't sign this. It's not the right thing. Not for me." Jack's voice was hoarse, and for the first time in years, it wasn't from stress. It was from something else. Something deeper. Mary blinked, caught off guard by the change in his tone. "Jack, you can't just walk away from everything you've built. You've worked too hard." "I know," Jack said quietly, "but I can't keep going like this. I've been chasing something for so long that I've lost sight of what matters." He picked up the pen and stared at it for a long moment, feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds in his hand. He had the power to sign it all away, the power to secure his future, to fix everything. But at what cost? Just then, his phone buzzed again. A new message. "Jack, please reconsider. This is your last chance." It was from his lawyer. The words echoed in his mind, and he realized the truth. He was standing on the edge of a cliff, and he wasn't sure if he wanted to jump or walk away. The storm outside raged on, and for a brief moment, Jack felt like he was trapped in the storm, too. Everything he had worked for, the business, the deals, the constant pressure, had led him to this point. It wasn't the success he had imagined. It was exhaustion. He dropped the pen onto the desk with a sharp snap. And then, as if on instinct, Jack grabbed his coat and stormed out of his office. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he couldn't stay there. Not like this. The world outside felt cold and damp, but somehow it also felt like a relief. An hour later, Jack found himself in front of Ruby's diner again. The warm glow of the neon sign was a stark contrast to the stormy world outside. He stepped inside, the bell above the door jingling, and was greeted by the familiar smell of coffee and grease. Comforting, simple, real. Lucy was standing at the counter, just like the last time he had walked in. She looked up, her expression unreadable at first. And then, just for a moment, her face softened. "Jack?" she asked, her voice low but steady. "You okay?" Jack took a deep breath, the weight in his chest easing just a little. "No," he said. "I'm not." She nodded slowly, as if she had known that already. "Take a seat," she said softly. "We've got a lot to talk about." He slid into a booth, the familiar booth he had sat in before. There was something about the place that made him feel small in a way that wasn't bad. Small in a way that let him breathe again. Lucy came over with a cup of coffee and set it down in front of him. She didn't ask questions. She didn't push him for answers. She just let him sit there in silence, the sound of the rain tapping against the windows filling the space between them. Finally, Jack spoke. "I don't know what to do, Lucy. Everything I've built, everything I've worked for, I thought it was going to make me happy. But now, it just feels like a weight I can't carry anymore." Lucy sat across from him, her gaze steady but understanding. "You don't have to carry it alone." Jack's throat tightened. The weight in his chest was still there, but somehow, hearing those words, simple but real, felt like a release. He wasn't sure how or why, but he felt like he was starting to see the way forward. "I don't know if I can just walk away from everything," he said quietly. "But I don't want to keep running either." Lucy reached across the table and put her hand on his. "Then don't run. Don't walk away either. Take a step. One step at a time." Jack looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he wasn't alone. Like maybe, just maybe, he could figure this out. The days after Jack's conversation with Lucy felt surreal. For the first time in years, the world seemed a little less heavy. The rain had stopped, and the sun was back out. But somehow, it wasn't the weather that made him feel lighter. It was something inside him shifting. He hadn't signed the deal. Not yet. He'd been walking around in a fog, half dazed by the gravity of his decision. There was so much to consider, so many people counting on him. But everything he had built, everything that had defined him for so long felt fragile. The idea of throwing it all away for a chance at something better was terrifying. But then there was Lucy. Every time he thought of her, there was a quiet sense of hope, something he hadn't felt in so long. Lucy. She was like a beacon in the chaos. It wasn't just her words that had stuck with him. It was her actions. How she had been the one to stand up for him when no one else would. She saw through the armor he'd carefully built. And that scared him. Because it wasn't just his business that felt fragile, it was his whole life. His whole identity. He needed to make a choice, and the longer he put it off, the harder it would be to face. The world had kept moving around him, as if nothing had changed. But inside, everything had. It was Saturday morning when Jack found himself back at Ruby's diner. It wasn't planned, he just ended up there, his feet taking him through the door before his mind had a chance to catch up. He needed a moment of peace, a breath, a break from the relentless decisions. Lucy was at the counter again, the same calm expression on her face as she poured coffee into a mug. When she saw him, she didn't say anything right away. Instead, she simply gestured to the booth in the corner, the same booth where everything had changed just a few days before. Jack sat down, running his hand through his hair. The weight of the world was back on his shoulders. But this time it didn't feel quite as heavy. "Hi," Lucy said softly, placing a cup of coffee in front of him. Her voice was warm, yet she didn't push him. She let him settle into the silence, which was exactly what he needed. "Hi," Jack replied, his voice sounding hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken much at all the past few days. "I'm sorry. I've been thinking about everything you said. About letting go." Lucy nodded, her gaze unwavering. "It's not easy, letting go. But sometimes, it's the only way forward." Jack let out a breath. It was funny how simple those words seemed. "I don't know how to do it. How do I just walk away from everything?" Lucy took a step closer, sitting across from him. She didn't try to rush him, didn't offer advice right away. She simply looked at him, as if she could see right into the part of him that was torn. The part that wanted to hold on to his past, even though it was slipping through his fingers. Letting go doesn't mean giving up, she said finally, her voice low. It means choosing something different, something that feels right for you, not for everyone else, not for your investors, not for your reputation. Jack's mind was a blur. He had always based his decisions on what was expected of him, what others needed him to do, the company, his father, his investors, but he didn't want to keep living for them. Not anymore. I'm scared, Lucy, he admitted, his voice cracking. I'm scared of making the wrong choice. What if I let everything fall apart? What if I lose it all? You don't have to be afraid, Lucy said quietly, her gaze steady. Not if you trust yourself. You've made it this far by listening to everyone else. What happens when you start listening to yourself? The truth in her words hit him harder than he expected. He hadn't listened to himself in so long. Every decision, every move he made was based on others' expectations. But now, for the first time in a long time, he could hear his own voice inside. It wasn't as loud as the others, but it was there. I don't know if I'm strong enough to change, Jack whispered. Lucy's eyes softened, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. She just let the silence speak. Then, with a slight smile, she said, You don't have to be strong. You just have to be real. The next day, Jack walked into his office for the first time in days. The air felt different, the weight of his decisions still hanging over him. But there was a clarity now that hadn't been there before. He sat at his desk, the phone on one side, the stack of contracts on the other. Everything was still there, the demands, the pressure, the expectation. But it didn't feel like it was crushing him anymore. For the first time, Jack realized that the decision wasn't about the deal. It wasn't about the business. It was about him. It was about what he wanted for his life. He opened his email inbox, scanning through the messages. His lawyer's emails, his accountant's reminders, all of them pressing him to make a choice. He felt that old familiar tension in his chest, but this time he didn't immediately reach for the pen. Instead, he took a deep breath and hit reply to the most recent email from his lawyer. I've decided not to sign the deal. I'll be moving in a different direction. Thank you for your work on this. He paused before hitting send. Felt like a risk, a huge one, but it also felt like the right one. The moment he pressed send, something shifted inside him. A weight lifted. It wasn't the end of his journey. It was just the beginning. He didn't know where the path would lead, but for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of the unknown. Jack stood up from his desk, looking out the window at the city below. The world was still out there, still moving forward. But this time, he was choosing how he wanted to move with it. The next few weeks felt like a blur to Jack. The decision to walk away from the deal wasn't easy, but each day, it became a little clearer that it was the right choice. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he was starting to find his way, one step at a time. He spent more time at Ruby's Diner. Not just because it was a place to escape, but because it had become something more, a reminder of the simple things, of slowing down, of taking the time to listen not just to others but to himself. And then, one morning, as the sun started peeking through the clouds after a rainy night, Jack found himself walking into the diner again, with a weight on his chest that he couldn't quite shake. It wasn't fear. It was hope. Lucy was there, of course, standing at the counter, pouring coffee into mugs with the same easy grace she had when he first walked in. But today, there was something different about her. She wasn't just the waitress who had caught his eye. She was someone he could talk to, someone he trusted. And today, for the first time, Jack realized he was looking forward to seeing her. "Hey," he said, his voice a little softer than usual as he sat down at the counter. Lucy looked up, her eyes brightening as she saw him. "Hey yourself. You look better than last time I saw you. Did you sleep at all?" Jack laughed lightly, shaking his head. "Not much, but I'm getting there. I'm getting better." She smiled. "That's good to hear." For a moment, they just looked at each other. No words, no awkward silences. Felt natural, comfortable, like they had known each other much longer than they had. "I've been thinking," Jack started, his words a little slower than usual, as if he were carefully choosing each one, "about everything, the business, the deal, and What you said to me. About letting go. Lucy leaned in, listening closely. I didn't get it at first. I thought letting go meant giving up. But now I see it differently. Letting go doesn't mean losing control. It means finding what really matters. And for the first time in a long time, I think I'm starting to figure that out. She nodded, but didn't say anything right away. She just gave him that same steady look she always did, as if she knew exactly what he meant. And I wanted to say thank you, Jack continued, his voice quiet, but full of sincerity. I think I would have kept running around in circles, never really getting anywhere, if it wasn't for you. Lucy raised an eyebrow as if surprised. You're thanking me? Jack chuckled, shaking his head. I never thought I'd be saying this, but yeah, I am. You opened my eyes, Lucy. You made me realize that maybe I don't need to control everything. Maybe I just need to trust myself a little more. She smiled at him then, and it wasn't the smile of a waitress who was just being polite. It was real, warm, like she understood. I think you've been ready to figure that out for a while now, she said softly. Jack looked down at his hands, unsure of how to put what he was feeling into words. But for the first time, he didn't feel like he was forcing anything. And maybe it's time to start figuring out what else matters. Like, what I want. Not just in business, but in life. Lucy's eyes softened, and there was a quiet understanding in them that made Jack feel like maybe he wasn't as lost as he thought. Yeah? She asked, her voice gentle. Yeah. Jack took a deep breath. Maybe it's time to start making some different choices. The bell above the diner door jingled, and Lucy glanced over to see a customer walk in. She turned back to Jack, offering him a small smile. You know, she said, her voice dropping a little lower, sometimes the best choices aren't the ones that make the most sense. Sometimes, it's the ones that feel right. Jack's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, everything around him seemed to fade away. He looked at her, really looked at her, and realized that for all the pressure he had been under, for all the expectations he had carried, there was something here, something real, and it didn't need to make sense. He didn't need to have everything figured out. He didn't need to control the outcome. He just needed to be present, to be open. I think I'm starting to see that, Jack said quietly. Lucy's smile grew a little wider, a knowing glint in her eyes. I'm glad to hear that, she replied, then placed a mug of coffee in front of him. It's about time you started listening to yourself. Jack picked up the mug and took a sip, feeling the warmth spread through him. And as he sat there, in the cozy diner that had come to mean so much to him, he realized that he wasn't just changing for the sake of his business or anyone else. He was changing for himself. He was letting go of the things that didn't matter and making room for the things that did. And maybe, just maybe, the next chapter of his life wasn't about success or money. It was about finding balance and love. He looked at Lucy again, and this time, the words didn't feel hard to say. Lucy, maybe I'd like to get to know you a little more, outside of all this. Her eyes softened, and there was a flicker of surprise before she smiled again. That same warm smile that made Jack feel like he was home. I'd like that, she said quietly, her voice full of something deeper now. I really would. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.